Welcome to part 4 of our Inner Agility series. Inner agility is how well you're able to subtract specific ingredients in your inner image which are blocking the smooth fulfillment of your goal. If you focus on training your own inner agility, which is what astrological transurfing is, you will improve on the 3 separate components of strength, balance, and coordination when it comes to all of your manifestations. If you haven't watched parts 1 through 3, you're going to have difficulty keeping up with the concepts in this video since you have no context. In part 1, I explained how the presence of an invisible ingredient in your inner image can block any or all of these components and slow down or cancel out your manifestations. So if you haven't watched part 1 yet, go back and start at the beginning of this series so that the subsequent practice work can actually be useful to you. If you have already watched parts 1 through 3, and hopefully you've read the Cosmic Flow Code too, and you're a pro at identifying excess potentials as they arise, then let's get into it. We're about to try our first inner agility exercise, and it's a 3-part series of questions that you can ask yourself every time you feel like your progress toward a goal has stalled. This practice will be more beneficial for you if you've already gone through the deconditioning process in the Cosmic Flow Code, so that your resistance levels are already a little bit lower than they were before you read it concerning whatever goal you're currently focused on. I do recommend reading it before going through the inner agility exercise in this video, because then you can apply it to the excess potentials you identified during the reading. Let's begin with question 1, which you can use when you begin to feel that your vision might not come to fruition or whenever you have doubts. To improve inner agility and align with the process toward the goal, we want to ask ourselves, where did I lose heart too soon and fracture my new soul-mind unity, or my inner image? In the Cosmic Flow Code, we discuss why you should never concern yourself with coming up with the how part of the goal using the mind, and how to let the soul lead the way instead. Often, the mind thinks that the goal will not arrive unless it can come up with the means to the goal on its own. To resist the temptation to try to outwardly solve the problem on your own by pushing against what you don't like takes inner strength. Remember that inner agility has 3 components: strength, balance, and coordination. Well, question 1 improves the strength metric because it allows you to first identify any thoughts you've been having where you're doubting that you've taken the right action to get to the goal. And remind yourself that your real work is to resist the temptation to be concerned with the how, or the means to the goal, and to allow external intention to take over. Take a few moments now to identify any specific doubts that are coming up for you about a certain goal you're working towards. If you're doubting whether the goal is possible at all, you need to inwardly remind yourself that there are any number of perfect solutions within the space of variations, but in order for you to perceive them, you must surrender the doubt. If you're doubting that you have enough money, time, or skill to reach the goal, you need to remind yourself that this is an indication you're more tuned into the absence of the goal in your inner image rather than being tuned into the presence of the goal. You need to look for small things that confirm that you have enough money, time, and skill to get to the next step. Do not concern yourself with how you will get to the end. That is the job of external intention. This is how question 1 will improve the strength metric. Whenever your inner image is fractured by doubts, you have become out of balance. Question 1 restores balance in your inner image because it removes your doubts so that the inner image is no longer fractured and you're no longer inwardly wobbling. Question 1 also improves coordination because it forces you to work with the reality mirror's delay properly. The incorrect coordination here would be to visualize the end goal and then in the next few days look for physical proof that the goal is coming. And then when you see something to the contrary, like a big obstacle, you assume that it's proof that the goal is impossible. The correct coordination is to ignore the appearance of any obstacles and surrender doubts as you go, because you've trained yourself to expect that the reality mirror works with a delay. This won't throw you out of coordination. If you continue to allow the doubt to form an inner image where your goal feels impossible, external intention will say, as you wish, whatever you choose, and you'll be transported to a sector of reality where that goal really is impossible. Again, we go over how that occurs in the Cosmic Flow Code, so I'm not going to discuss it in detail here. This is the time to surrender the doubt you have identified in favor of an inner image where the goal is already fulfilled, so that an external intention can say, as you wish, whatever you choose, and transport you to a reality sector containing that exact fulfillment. Now for question number 2, which you can use when you've already gotten rid of your doubts, but things still feel slow, stuck, or bumpy. In these moments, it's useful to ask ourselves, when did I create an excess potential, which manifested as a problem or a speed bump? Question 2 will improve your strength metric considerably because you practice refusing to believe that you're a victim of outer circumstance, which looks like peddling the narrative that prolonged suffering is normal in some way. Of course, we're all subject to contrast and the pain of the human experience, but prolonged suffering is an indicator that our inner agility is low. We're conditioned to think that when we go after a goal, we need to ask ourselves, what should I add to my life in order to achieve this? How can I work harder toward my goal so that my dreams come true? That is not true inner strength. True strength is reminding ourselves that it is about getting into a state of inner alignment with the divine intelligence, or what we're calling external intention in transurfing terms. When we emit a frequency, which is all the time, and external intention says, as you wish, whatever you choose, we want to make sure that what we are choosing is something that brings the soul satisfaction and fulfillment. Carrying an excess potential is the same as choosing an obstacle. And again, I train my students in the Cosmic Flow Code to recognize all the different forms that excess potentials take so they can master the skill of dissolving them. For example, the world conditions you to believe that the more you desire something, the more likely it is you'll eventually get it. But in the Cosmic Flow Code, we break down why this is actually not helpful, because it keeps you tuned into the absence of what you want. When you carry a lot of strong desire, which literally translates to I do not have, you're tuned into the absence of the goal. This is just like when you carry fear in your inner image. You are constantly focused on how terrible it would feel if you lose the chance at achieving the goal. This causes humans to inflate the importance of the goal's achievement over all other subjects in their life. Artificially elevated importance is one of the most common excess potentials people create on the way to the goal. Because again, we have been conditioned to believe that if I strongly desire something, I'll eventually get it. This belief will actually merely cause us to choose to keep our goal at arm's length. Because your inner image states, I do not have the goal that I want. The desire and fear might each be strong enough by themselves to lead to an excess potential, which will then become the very reason why our goal is unreachable. Question 2 also improves coordination in that it forces you to give up efforts to push against something in the outer world that you do not like, which will then cause the very thing to stick to you like glue. An incorrect coordination here, which is super common, is trying to resist certain qualities in other people that we don't like. In trying to control their behavior, we are merely resisting our own negative feelings about the situation, the anger and the fear that the behavior won't stop. That's what forms the excess potential of artificially elevated importance, or the anger and the pride that we have about how we like to handle things, leading to the excess potential of superiority. In either case, we will only succeed in creating an energetic boomerang, where the very thing we're trying to push away from us, that behavior that we don't like in others, will simply come right back to our reality sector and stick to us like glue. We have to instead simply accept the negative feelings we have about it and allow other people to be as they are. When we do this, our attention is freed up to become focused on the new fulfilling relationships that will take the place of this undesirable one when our energy is flowing properly again. Resist, surrender, resist, surrender. That's what keeps you aligned. Cosmic Flow Code will illuminate a lot of stuck negative emotion you've been carrying, but don't expect yourself to surrender it all at once. Remember, guilt always compounds any negative emotion that arises. If you're having trouble surrendering a negative emotion, try surrendering the guilt you have about that emotion in the first place. Then the negative emotion itself will be much easier to surrender. Now for question number 3, which you can use when you feel kind of vaguely upset, blasé, and just not inspired by life. When we feel this way, it's very useful to ask ourselves, when did I allow my inner image to be negatively affected by a pendulum's provocation? If you're having feelings that something is just not right, but you can't quite put your finger on it, it's likely that the inner image is out of balance, and the most common cause of that is that a pendulum is trying to siphon your life energy for itself. Question 3 will help you improve your inner agility by restoring balance, because it forces you to identify pendulums, which are energetic structures that are invisible to our physical eyes, but are the underpinnings of all of society. We can't avoid them entirely, but we can identify which are a benefit to us and which will just drain us of our precious life energy. This is another concept from reality transurfing, which really helps us understand how people can fall asleep to their own agency and then get transferred to a sector of reality where they're trapped in limiting circumstances that they don't seem to be able to get out of. If you've done any research into cults or know someone that's been in one, it isn't a matter of a lack of intelligence. That's not why someone remains in a cult. They aren't stupid. They have just fallen asleep to their own agency because the pendulum, which is the underlying energy structure of the cult, has cleverly tricked and manipulated their need for belongingness and validation, or their need to be right, so that the individual is no longer tuned into their own soul's success sectors, but rather tuned into a sector of reality where they are using all of their life energy to feed the pendulum's agenda instead. Pendulums have very clever ways of doing this. Let's briefly go over how reality transurfing by Vadim Zeland defines pendulums. Pendulums are energy structures that arise from collective thought forms which take on a life of their own, imposing rules over the whole group. Pendulums actually have the ability to superimpose false goals onto individual adherents who aren't aware that it's a pendulum conditioning them to want the goal, but their soul actually wanted something entirely different. Pendulums lack conscious intent, but they do feed on negative energy. If they can't hook onto your life energy and harvest it for themselves, they don't survive, so they're incentivized to maximize conflict inside of you. The key point to remember is that the pendulum is not incentivized to care about the well-being of the individuals that belong to it. It just cares about its own survival. Examples include special interest groups, hierarchical organizations, opposing nations, rival friend groups, political parties, and the two sides of war. In order to maximize the negative energy, the pendulum seduces people with a promised reward, like money, winning, belonging, or status, but the individual will have to pay out the nose later on because of the negativity. The reason they pay dearly is because pendulums are constantly at war with other pendulums in order to harvest the negative energy of the people on the losing side. The loss provokes the individuals on the losing side to emit negative emotion, and this forms an inner image centered on fear, irritation, bitterness, grief, lack, etc., which can have negative consequences. It can cause the next reality sector that unfolds to be a negative one if the negative inner image is sustained, which happens if you allow the conflict to get under your skin. Many people aren't aware of excess potentials, pendulums, or even their inner metaphysical image because all these things are invisible to our physical eyes. The reason I teach people to watch out for them is because you cannot stay tuned into your own soul's success sectors continuously unless you know how to handle them properly. I do have more videos on pendulums and how to deal with them by aligning with your soul's success sectors instead, and those videos go into more depth, so be sure to watch them after this inner agility series. Those will also help you to use question 3 to restore balance in your inner image, because if you cannot identify that one of the pendulums you've come across in daily life is taking up a lot of real estate in your inner image, it will be very difficult to get your inner image back into a state of balance where you're aligned with your soul's fulfillment instead of the pendulum's agenda. One way to put this question into practice is to look back at the excess potential identification we did in question 2, where we identified the ways in which we're placing the goal on a pedestal by artificially inflating its importance. This is actually one of the tricks that a pendulum uses to ensnare someone into a multi-level marketing scam, for example. It's because they tell them that they can make all this money, so the person places this money-making scheme on a pedestal, and then the pendulum pulls the rug out from under them at the last second. When you take the goal off the pedestal in your mind, that's a method of lowering its importance to a reasonable level, like going and getting a snack from the kitchen. You view this action as routine, attainable, and no big deal. When you treat the goal that way, it's easier to check in with the soul and ask your soul, do I still want this goal, or was I conditioned by the pendulums I belong to in society to want the goal because it seemed so shiny, prestigious, and unattainable? Pendulums will condition us to follow a one-size-fits-all model of success that doesn't really exist, knowing that this will produce lots of frustration and negative energy when people fail to see results. They use that negative energy to ensure their own survival, and they don't care whether you find soul fulfillment. If you're in a situation like this, pause the video and ask your soul, do I still want this goal? Or was I conditioned by the pendulums I belong to in society to want the goal because it seemed so shiny or unattainable? If the soul still does want the goal from an authentic place, then congratulations, you've identified a goal that actually does belong to your soul, and not one that pendulums have conditioned you to want. That's amazing. If not, you can drop that goal and free up the prime real estate in your inner image so that you can tune into your soul's success sectors instead, which will bring much more fulfillment in all areas of life than holding on to a false goal ever could. Once you make it a habit to pose these questions to yourself consistently, you address all 3 components of inner agility: strength, balance, and coordination. And then you're free. You're free to choose the sectors of reality which contain your unique soul's true fulfillment. You might be thinking to yourself, this new knowledge is great, but I don't really see the need to dig into my astrological natal chart. I'll just apply that 3-step process whenever I get frustrated or whenever I remember. You can just do this for every negative emotion as it comes up, but you soon run into the issue that material which is in your subconscious is, well, subconscious and out of your awareness. In those instances, what are you going to do? Just allow yourself to remain stuck? How will you break through the ceiling if you run into a pattern that your conscious mind can't recognize on its own? I want all of my students to have the depth of awareness that comes with finding out which karmic impressions their soul came in with, because this gives you true freedom of choice. Once you see the karmic impression from which these negative patterns originate, you don't have to wait until thought number 20,222 comes up 10 months from now and then resolve it. The opportunity cost of doing it that slowly is astronomical. Let's apply that approach with our previous example, and you tell me if you still think it's sufficient. Returning to our previous example about manifesting positive results in business, you might think to yourself, oh, I don't have any limiting beliefs when it comes to business. I'm a strategic thinker, I'm a problem solver, and so on. And those things may be true, but what you're not accounting for is the negative effect it will have on your business if you neglect to address that unconscious karmic block that you've been carrying about the kind of treatment you deserve in your relationships. This is known as opportunity cost, and it means when you just ignore these unconscious karmic blocks that you have, then you forfeit your opportunity for the soul to enjoy your highest fulfillment in a physical form. Unconscious block will always create a ceiling that makes you believe that you can't break through it. It's just that your mind perceives these problems as normal or as your baseline experience. If you don't transmute the destructive expression of a past karmic impression by surrendering the negative emotions involved, what will happen is all your relationships in your business will still reflect that destructive pattern. Because remember, you didn't change anything about that pattern at the level of the film. There was no inner change. If you want to be able to clear all the excess potentials you carry in your inner image, it's helpful to be able to see where these negative patterns are coming from so that you can take a systematic approach. So how do we find these impressions? Well, that's what natal astrology is about. It's a symbolic map of aspects, or the conversations between all your inner planetary archetypes, which represent all the different impressions that your soul was carrying when you incarnated. If you look at your natal chart, you can start picking up on these karmic impressions that your conscious mind didn't even realize were there before you looked. When you do this, you find negative feelings and excess potentials that have been creating delays and obstacles every time you wanted to manifest something new. Do you want to go through an example of how this transmutation can happen? Let's do it so I can show you how straightforward this is once you've had some practice. Maybe you have Mars opposed Saturn in the natal chart, and this is the classic start-stop dynamic, like driving with the brakes on. You assert your will in the world, Mars, but there's a delay or a negation, Saturn, of what you're trying to express. If you didn't know you had this in your natal chart, you'd probably assume life was just that way for everyone. But the reality is we're all looking at the world through these different filters or karmic impressions. When this expresses at a low level of consciousness, there's a buildup of anger, frustration, and resentment due to the karmic impression that life or other people keep blocking you from getting what you want at every single turn. Every time you get your hopes up or take action, there's a block, a delay, or an obstacle, or an authority figure who prevents you from proceeding forward. In a past lifetime, it may have looked like maybe your spouse was a bully towards you, or maybe your boss was abusive, and for whatever reason, you weren't able to either leave them or stand up for yourself because they always held something over your head or emotionally blackmailed you. It doesn't really matter what the details were in that lifetime, because the principles of transmuting it from an inner liability into an inner asset are the same in every case. It's just that without the natal chart, people will just grin and bear the prolonged suffering without realizing that they're paying an opportunity cost in doing so. They could turn this opposition into an asset and stay inside the miraculous mirror cycle, but because they haven't bothered to look in the natal chart and become aware of it, the associated thought patterns, emotional patterns, and energy patterns will tend to stay on the same level because there has been no change on the karmic level. If you've ever had an astrological reading, if you've ever had an astrology reading or studied your own natal chart, you've likely experienced those aha moments where something just clicks inside of you about a pattern you've experienced your whole life but could never put your finger on. That is what I refer to as resonance, because suddenly your conscious mind is able to fully understand and articulate what the soul has been trying to communicate in symbols and feeling tones this whole time. The mind can now literally resonate in harmony with the soul in a conscious way over this topic. If we hope to find individual soul fulfillment, we absolutely must have a tool from which we can study our own unique design. Otherwise, we will have no other reference point from which to refuse societal conditioning and any number of societal pendulums which may or may not be of benefit to us personally. When we are unaware of an opposition in our natal chart, the mind will tend to project that inner conflict onto the outer world and try to find the solution somewhere out there, when the issue is really an internal one. The mind has a projection mechanism where it will call someone else the problem and try to get them to change their behavior when the conflict is actually internal. I'm not saying that the person bullying you should never be held accountable. They definitely should be held accountable, and of course, we're all going to go through life experiences that bring us pain or discomfort. When Mars opposite Saturn is unconscious, though, then that brutality is projected out onto the world. Rather than being aware, I have a karmic impression in my inner image, which is at the root of some psychological or emotional or energetic brutality that I'm carrying within myself, the mind will instead project that conflict outward and think that the bully or the other person who mistreated you is the reason why you feel this way on the inside, when the true vibrational root of it is the inner karmic impression. This projection can be represented in another way using this formula. Here's the anger and fear, which are a product of the mind's belief that other people or outer circumstances are the cause of the problem, which leads to this specific excess potential. The importance of controlling other people or outer circumstances is then elevated way too high, because every time you project, your inner image is in a disempowered state. The way to transmute that is to dissolve the excess potentials that have been sustained by your resistance to the negative emotion involved in the situation. It's not easy to lower importance as the first step before the outer world changes, but you have to develop the inner agility to do that because it's the only way out. So initially, the mind thinks that when someone else tells you no, and they are particularly mean about it, and they go out of their way to ruin what you're trying to do, the mind will first assume that you're in a victimized position because you don't recognize it as a karmic impression, and your mind is projecting the conflict and convincing you that the conflict source is external. However, once you recognize it as internal, because you see it in the natal chart, you can then make the real power move and dissolve the artificially elevated importance. At that point, the illuminated pathway to your empowerment will literally light up for you, and you'll be able to perceive the way forward in which these two planetary archetypes are working together. Because when you're willing to surrender the emotional energy behind a negative emotion, the universe automatically replaces it with a higher one. Again, that's been verified and tested by Dr. David R. Hawkins, and it was originally presented in his 1994 book, Power versus Force. New, more positive life avenues will open up to you when you can adjust your perception that the problem is not the world or the fact that you can't get other people to behave the way you want, but rather that you are not disciplined about the health of your inner image. It's a simple concept, but people are walking around unaware that their soul is carrying these karmic impressions. So I knew that if I wanted to give my students the ability to stay within the miraculous mirror cycle, I had to get them interested in becoming aware of what's actually going on in the natal chart, because that tells your mind what's actually going on with your soul. And this is where positive change can become continuous. So you'll have to decide for yourself. Do you want to remain unaware about what your soul is carrying? Or are you going to take the bull by the horns and leverage the difficulty you're experiencing to climb the scale of consciousness by pulling back each projection as it arises? When you surrender what you were resisting when the opposition was out of your awareness, which was the sustained anger about people telling you no and the fear that if your enemies are powerful enough they can take you down, then the artificially elevated importance dissolves. Now the Mars opposite Saturn becomes an inner asset to you because that start-stop energy, or the driving with the brakes on energy, is no longer frustrating to you. In fact, now you perceive the higher purpose of it, which is to insert periodic pauses into your life, Saturn, which give you the time and space necessary to remember that all you have to do is dissolve the excess potential and the outer problem will dissolve to make way for you to express your will as you wish. Mars. In this way, what looked like an inner liability before now is an inner asset. This is because Saturn is now serving as a coach to Mars when Mars wants to assert his will in the world. After you restore the resist, surrender cycle by dissolving the excess potential. A run-of-the-mill astrology reading would make you aware of more of these aspects than you were aware of before, but I'm challenging you to turn this into more of an adventure. I recommend just starting with the Cosmic Flow Code, which includes the Little Black Book of Dissolving Obstacles, because it will be shorter and more manageable to start with. If you experienced any new feelings of inspiration or lightness in this Inner Agility training series, feel free to leave a comment below and share with the community, because that positive energy will return to you like a boomerang. As always, I'm so inspired by the dedication of all my students, and I'm so honored that so many of you are enjoying the Astrological Transurfing experience. I love you all, and remember, you're exactly where you need to be.